What's up guys, it's me Jeremy. So we do a lot of history videos on this channel, and not only myself but honestly kind of everyone that does history videos just talks about how the beta champions were so overpowered and all that kind of stuff. And a big part of why the beta champions were so crazy in the first place were essentially because they were just designed based off of the original Dota. But the thing is that the original Dota didn't actually have summoner spells, and when designing the champions they didn't account for the added power that summoner spells would bring into the game, so they were just left with a boatload of just insanely overpowered champions, since not only were they balanced to be at the same power level of Dota, but they also had summoner spells slapped on top of them to boot. But one thing that definitely goes a bit underappreciated, and something that I think is still very interesting, is actually the weakest beta champions, because not all of the champions in beta were as crazy as you might think, and there's actually quite a few that if you put them in the game today, they would be weaker than that version of the actual champion that is now. So we'll be rating these champions based on how powerful they were compared to the other beta champions at the time, so join us today in taking a look at the top 10 most underpowered beta champions. And as always, if you guys enjoyed the video, definitely hit that like button, and if you don't, the dislike button is right next to it, so feel free to hit that one too. In the number 10 spot, we actually have Nasus. So Nasus was actually pretty similar back in beta. You know, his abilities haven't really changed at all over the years. So usually with beta champions, they were just reworked to be less powerful from their beta version, but Nasus actually had to be buffed from his beta version because he wasn't really that much good compared to all the other champions. You know, his niche is, it's the infinite stacking on his Q, but the thing is that in beta he actually stacked a lot slower because his stacks scaled with the rank on his Q, and he would only get 1 stack per unit kill at level 1 of his Q, 2 stacks at level 2 and 3, and then finally 3 stacks at level 4 and 5, and so as a result he took way more time to get huge, and that's not entirely good, especially in a meta of entirely overpowered stuff. His wither on his W was a little bit more potent back in beta, at least. The slow was more, the attack speed reduction was more, but overall he really wasn't all that much more powerful than he is in the game now, so he's definitely a great starting point for our top 10. At number 9 we have Sivir. So back in beta, Sivir's Q scaled off of AP instead of AD, so she missed out on a lot of damage just in general trades unless she bought some really weird items. And her passive was also pretty awkward too. It gave her dodge chance while moving, which was great if you were good at kiting, but unless you were perfect at it and always moved at the right time, it kind of just felt useless. And it was just so random, then that much variance on a passive is really not that good of a thing. Her E spell shield as well didn't refund any mana back in beta, so she would constantly just run out of mana all the time very quickly. Her W was a toggle effect, so it could potentially be used infinitely, but it wasn't really all that much more powerful, and overall, the beta version of Sivir just wasn't that strong compared to her competition. At number 8 we've got Singed, who like Nasus had pretty much the exact same kit as he does now. The difference was back in beta, Singed's mana costs were just way higher. His flip did a little bit more damage, but it didn't have the root mechanic on it that it does now, and his ultimate was actually a little bit weaker than the version of his ultimate today at max level. His other abilities were generally just pretty much exactly the same. I think beta Singed's Q actually does the exact same amount of damage as Singed's Q today, which is really interesting. And overall he was roughly just equal, pretty much in the exact same power level as Singed's version to today, and if you compare that to some of the crazy beta champions, that actually comes out to be pretty darn weak. Next up at number 7 we have Annie. So again, it's a little bit crazy to think about, but some of these beta champions are kind of just weak because they're closer to their power level that they are in the game today. And Annie, she had a little bit more damage back in beta. Her base scalings were a little bit higher, her ratios were a little bit higher, but she also had much higher mana costs to punish her from just abusing abilities all the time. And as well, her stun also took 5 spells to land instead of 4, so you had to be careful, and you also had to spend a ton of mana to just get the stun in the first place. So in all honesty, it's possible that that version of Annie is potentially just weaker than the version of Annie today, just flat out, which is pretty insane for a beta champion. Are you guys noticing a trend yet? At number 6 we've got Amumu, who had, as you probably guessed, pretty much the exact same kit as he has today. Only his ultimate did way less damage as it does now, and his W also did a lot less damage as well, and all of his abilities costed way more mana, and the damage reduction on his E was also less than Amumu today. In his defense though, he did have a stronger passive with up to 40 magic resist shred on the people he attacked and a little bit higher of an AP ratio on his Q, but all in all, Amumu in beta was actually weaker than he is in the game now. Breaking into our top 5, we have Katarina. So Katarina wasn't actually that bad at all after her reworks, but her original kit before the rework and during beta, honestly, it really just left a bad impression on players. Her bouncing blade hit fewer targets. In fact, the bouncing blade could only hit 2 targets at level 1, and it had to be leveled up to bounce an extra time for each level, which honestly made her laning phase just terrible. Her ultimate was kind of the same effect. Her ultimate was kind of the same as her bouncing blade. It would only hit 1 target in the first point of her ultimate, and it could hit 1 more additional target for each point, up to 3. And I mean, level 18 Katarina was maybe cool, and I guess, but getting there in the first place was just awful. And she also had a really weak W ability as well called Killer Instincts, which gave her a passive that gave her more attack damage for striking the same target consecutively, and she could activate it to get bonus effects on some of her other abilities, you know, full damage on all of the Q bounces instead of just decayed damage, or more of a dodge chance in her Shunpo, but it was kind of boring, it was kind of bad, and overall, especially for beta, it was just underpowered. At number 4, we have Nunu, and this one's a little bit silly kind of because it stems as a result of some mechanic that he had back in beta. You know, today you kind of pick Nunu for the crazy obnoxious counter jungling, the objective control, and to land those super awesome ultimates, right? And even today, Nunu isn't actually that powerful of a champion. Well, the thing is that in beta, his kit first off, it did exactly the same thing, so it wasn't stronger in any way. But the big difference back in beta is that if Nunu's absolute zero was interrupted, which, let's be honest, is not hard to do at all and happens pretty much every time, it would do absolutely 0 damage instead of just a % of the damage, or just, you know, reduced damage. And that's kind of funny flavor, but it was just really depressing from a gameplay perspective overall, and that lands Nunu a spot on our list. At number 3, we have Ashe, and now we're really starting to break into the beta champions that were just so much weaker, even just so much weaker than their versions today, honestly. And if we compare Ashe's kit to anything, she'd be weaker than the current version of Tristana in the game today. I mean, back in beta, Ashe didn't have her hawkshot ability at all. Instead, she kind of just had the passive gold gain effect from killing minions, and the rest of her kit was entirely the same. And later, she was given the hawkshot ability, but still kept the passive gold gain effect, and didn't really become all that overpowered as a result when she got that. So before that, well, she was honestly just awful, and the hawkshot ability was a cool addition that kind of complemented her utility carry sort of theme that her ultimate gave her. But, you know, before she got that, she essentially just was a champion with 3 abilities instead of 4, and especially when you got people like Beta Twisted Fate running around, AoE stunning people every 3 seconds and teleporting across the map, Ashe just couldn't compete in any way, shape, or form. And now we're really getting to some trash tier champions considering the average power level of the game in beta, and number 2 might be a little bit surprising to some of you because it's actually Corki. And the real problem was his mana cost. So Corki in beta didn't have any crazy bonus effects, didn't have any crazy abilities that he doesn't have anymore. He just had massive mana cost. So if you used his Q 3 or 4 times, you would just run out of mana straight up. And the thing is that every single ability had a higher mana cost, and it wasn't just like a little bit higher, it was pretty much to the point where every single ability cost practically double the mana that it does today, and you would just run out of mana so fast without really any compensation at all. I mean, his abilities didn't really do that much more damage or anything, and you were just constantly running out of mana left and right, and you just really couldn't ever use your abilities. I mean, have fun using auto attacks only on a champion that's supposed to be caster focused, and really you would just end up dealing 0 damage. So how does it get worse than that? Well, number 1 is Tristana as the weakest beta champion, and it really does get so much worse. You know, with Corki, you know, he runs dry after a few abilities, but at least those abilities kind of do something in the first place, so we could maybe try to get a kill or escape if things were going badly. But as for Tristana, back in beta, she didn't have the one ability in her kit that she needed the most, which was Rocket Jump. Back in beta, her W was not Rocket Jump, it was a damage over time ability called a Rending Shot, and the rest of her kit was pretty much the same, but with the massive drawback of the fact that she had no way to get out of trouble. You know, she just didn't have Rocket Jump on her kit at all. She became a super easy target for every strong beta champion in the game and couldn't really do much more than temporarily push them away with her ultimate. And she still had a way to improve her attack range, but it was on the active effect of her Q, which at the same time also slowed her. So to get that increased range, she would have to slow herself, which really sucked in a patch dominated by just insanely mobile champions and just people teleporting all over the place and jumping on stuff and just dominating the game. And Tristana isn't exactly at a strong point in the game right now, but Tristana today would just totally stomp beta Tristana any day of the week. And that just about wraps up our top 10 weakest beta champions. You know, if any of you guys actually had experience playing these champions in beta, we'd love to hear about it, so definitely let us know in the comments below. And it looks like that's gonna be it for me. If you enjoyed the video, drop a like, and if you didn't enjoy the video, the dislike button's right next to it, so feel free to drop one of those too. Subscribe if you want. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.